The Family System of a Survivor of Ritual Abuse, Part 1. Rosie for Change, in her own words. Rosie's got a blog on memoirofaredemptivelife.com where you can learn more about her story. Who am I? My name is Rosie. I am the baby in Ruth's arms. I was born the fourth child to Ruth and Jack. Ruth was born on January 7th, 1937 in Chickasha, Pennsylvania. Jack was born on August 17th, 1936 in New Haven, Connecticut. They married on August 20th, 1955 in West Haven, Connecticut. They had been both born into dysfunctional families. Ruth was the youngest of 9 children. She had 4 brothers and 4 sisters. Jack was the oldest of 5 children. 1 who was a full brother, 1 half-sister, and 2 half-brothers. Both had been sexually abused as children from someone in their families. It's been called incest, but I'm learning that it's opportunistic pedophilia. Pedophiles just prey on their own family. Jack was physically abused. Ruth was emotionally abused. Her mother actually got mad at her and her sisters when she caught their brothers sexually abusing them. I learned this from my 3 aunts when I was doing my undergraduate degree and doing a research paper on my family history. Ruth and Jack had their first child in 1957, their second in 1958, their third in 1959, their fourth in 1961, that's me, their fifth in 62, their 6th in 65, and their 7th in 68, 5 boys and 2 girls. Both had affairs. Both had children by other people. My youngest brother isn't Jack's. I know a sister 8 months younger than me, but don't know my other siblings from Jack's affairs. My sister has a very similar name as myself. There is only 1 letter difference in our name, or it would be identical. Our middle names are completely identical. The first 4 children were all named after their grandparents. My sister was named after Ruth's mother. I after Jack's mother. Jack's mother died when he was 6. His father remarried when he was 10 to a woman who was horrible. So his dad was abusing him, and then his stepmom was abusing him. His father died when he was 16. Jack did have an aunt and uncle on his mother's side that were good to him. Ruth adored my sister, her oldest child. My grandmother adored my sister as well. She spent a lot of time with my grandmother. When Ruth was pregnant with me, she insisted that they move to another neighborhood. In 1960, their neighbors were calling the police on Ruth. She would leave my 2 older brothers outside all day in the hot sun. They would cry and cry and cry. Jack didn't do much to support Ruth. It was obvious she was overwhelmed and didn't have the skills to be a mom. I don't think Jack knew how to help. I know from Jack that he felt overwhelmed as well. They were 23 and 24, had 3 children, and 1 out of the way. Jack gave in to Ruth, and they started looking for houses. Ruth wanted to move to Memorgwin in East Haven, Connecticut. Jack didn't, but he caved in. There were no child abuse laws in the late 50s and early 60s. It was very for people like their neighbors to advocate for children. The house they lived in had no mortgage. It was part of Jack's inheritance, and it was in a good neighborhood. They sold the house and moved to a converted summer cottage. It was by the beach in East Haven, Connecticut. 37 Stevens Street. The house of horrors. Now they had a mortgage, which added more strain to their already strained marriage. Ruth told us several times as children that she moved us to this neighborhood because the neighbors would mind their own business. She moved us to a neighborhood that had people who, at that time, were on the fringes of society. Gays and lesbians, prostitutes, people living together without being married, divorcees, single moms, and violence. Sounds silly, but it's true. It was 51 years ago. Ruth really did her research to find a neighborhood that would mind its business. There were gang fights at the beach when I was young. I wasn't allowed to go to the beach alone until I was 8 years old. This subsided as I got older. When I was around 3, Ruth started taking me out at night, late at night. I don't remember how often. The neighbor said nothing. When I was 31, I saw a neighbor and told him what I had survived. He said, "We knew she was taking you out at night. We didn't know where to." Can you imagine? This neighbor lived 3 streets away and was aware that Ruth was taking me somewhere at night, at a time when children should be in bed asleep. I would like to think that if I knew a woman was abusing her children and taking some of them out at night, I would question what she was doing. The reality is, who would even think she was taking her daughter to be ritualistically abused? When Jack learned my memories of the ritual abuse, he was very upset. He had no idea what she was doing. Mostly because he wasn't around, or because he was drunk and passed out. He has apologized to me over and over for this. Unfortunately, this made Jack a passive abuser. This is where the house used to stand. Ruth became so mentally ill she couldn't care for the house. The town of East Haven condemned the house. The trees are where the house was. And I strongly believe there should have been some kind of cleansing ceremony on that land because a lot of evil went on there. In the early 60s, Ruth started to attend a new age group. It was a group of people with one of my aunts. It was advertised as a spiritual group. It was held in a strip mall in downtown East Haven. This group believed in crystals and past lives. Then it led to them using the Ouija board. They did drugs, drank, lit candles and incense. Then this led to putting spells on people. The aunt that went with Ruth told me the story herself. Ruth was very drawn to this group because she had felt so powerless most of her life. This group helped her feel like she had power. This was Ruth's initiation into what I call a cult. Once she was in it, it was hard to get out. For some reason, she got deeper into this cult than my aunt did. Once they started putting spells on people, my aunt stopped going. My aunt told me at that point she was pretty scared about where this could lead, and she didn't want any part of it. And Ruth wouldn't listen to her and stopped going. One of the members of this cult was named Karen. She was a neighbor when I was young. I thought she was the only one who cared for me. When I was a year old, Ruth tried to kill my two older brothers. She put them in the bathtub in ice cold water with ice cubes. I was with Karen. My sister was at the neighbor's. I have always felt that it was strange that I would be at Karen's house. I didn't understand how Karen didn't know what Ruth did. The reality is that Karen knew full well because she was there. Something I would realize as I was dealing with my flashbacks and my memories. Obviously not as a 1-year-old. When I was 3, my father came home from work. He grabbed me, picked me up, and put me in my younger brother's playpen with him. Then he told my sister to get towels, and she did. He got a chair and put it over the large heat vent in the dining room. He put the heat on. He told my sister to get whiskey. I am watching this through the mesh of the playpen. He got my brothers out of the tub, set them on his lap, wrapped the towels around them. My sister got the whiskey. He gave my brothers the whiskey. My sister looks terrified. Jack looks panicked. He kept saying, "Ruthie, Ruthie, what are you doing? Ruthie, what are you doing?" over and over again. It happened again. The boys were in the tub with cold water and ice cubes. Ruth was just sitting at her desk with her head down on the desk, directly in back of Jack. I used to believe that Ruth tried to kill my brothers. I have come to believe and know that Ruth was trying to get out of the cult. And this is what they did as a way to keep Ruth from leaving or talking. She was only 25 years old. When I was 4, my sister and I slept in bunk beds in the front room. I remember being in that room, talking to Ruth. I remember sharing with her my being put in the basement stairwell at night, that I would be kept there for hours. It was cold, creepy, and scary. I didn't understand why I was being put in this stairwell. I didn't sleep at all when I was put in that stairwell because I was too afraid. I was terrified of the dark. And they were telling me to denounce God. I didn't understand why they wanted me to do that. I refused, and that meant I was in there sometimes, all night. It didn't make sense to me that this group of adults wanted me to denounce God. What for? I would tell Ruth that I was put in the stairwell again, with the monster at the top of the stairs. She would tell me I had had a bad dream. After a while, I believed her. In 1966, Ruth's mother died. This devastated her. Ruth freaked out and wouldn't go to the funeral. She feared death terribly. I didn't know how to act. I was only 5 years old. I got a beating because I didn't cry when I found out my grandmother died. Then there was Karen. During this, I spent a lot of time. She would read me books, and we would watch TV together. I remember feeling very safe with Karen. She made me feel cared for. I didn't really like my grandmother. I remember her being very cold and mean. I remember using the word evil to describe her. I didn't know how a 5-year-old would know what evil was. The reality is that I knew it too well. I remember Ruth and her siblings all fighting over the belongings of my grandmother. It was terrible and caused a lot of strife in Ruth's families. My cousin Nancy and her husband moved into our house in 1966. This meant that there were 4 adults and 7 children living in a 1,000-square-foot house, and that's because Nancy had a young child. Ruth and my cousin fought a lot. My cousin didn't like how Ruth was treating some of us. Ruth didn't like being told she was being abusive. I don't think they lived there a long time. One time, Ruth and Jack were having a big fight. Jack threw something through the window, and it landed in my second youngest brother's crib. My cousin had a fit at Jack. She was right. My brother could have been seriously hurt. And I believe it was after that fight when they decided to move out of the house. By now, Jack was drinking heavily. Substance abuse is common in adults who have survived child abuse, especially sexual abuse. He was numbing his pain away. Ruth was angry most of the time. I remember receiving a lot of beatings from her. I tried to spend my time out of the house as much as possible. I hated being in that house. It was very scary. When I was 5 years old, I had an accident and peed the bed. Bedwetting can be a sign of a child who was sexually abused. Ruth was so mad at me. She took me downstairs to the bathroom. I was moved upstairs so my brothers could have, so my sister can have her own room, and I shared a room with my brothers. First, Ruth physically put me on the toilet with the top closed. She insisted I sit there and pee on myself again. I was crying hysterically. This got her madder. She picked me up, she opened the lid, and she shoved my head into the toilet, to the water, and then she flushed it. I thought I was going to die. This is something she would repeat, especially if I didn't clean the toilet right. I spent a lot of my childhood making sure that toilet was clean. Then I got a beating. They were worse when Jack wasn't around. When he was around, she watched herself more. By this point, he had gotten up and heard what was going on, and he got me away from Ruth and brought me into another part of the house. And he was screaming at her and telling her she has no right to beat her children. I can remember being terrified of Ruth. I stayed terrified of her throughout my childhood. It lasted until I was 27 years old. My father moved out of the house in 1967. Ruth was trying to stab him. She had a knife with a wooden handle. He was holding her down, yelling, "Ruthie, Ruthie, put the knife down." And they were wrestling. He told her that he was leaving if she didn't stop. She didn't. He wrestled the knife out of her hand. Then he left. I was devastated. I loved my dad. He treated me nicely. I could tell he loved me. He is who called me Rosie. He never called me my real name. This would piss Ruth off. He calls me Rosie to this day. I could not tell that Ruth loved me. My need to get her love went on until I realized I didn't need her to love me. It wasn't worth it to waste my time and energy to seek something I wasn't ever going to get. Ruth had severe mood swings. At least, that is what I thought as a child. She was diagnosed with DID when she was in her early 60s. DID is dissociative identity disorder. It occurs in people who experience extreme abuse or extreme trauma as a child. It is a way that the brain helps the child not remember the trauma they are experiencing. When she was diagnosed, the psychiatrist said that she had two distinct personalities, one who was evil and one who was good. He said neither personality knew about the other. He also said the evil one was the one that was out the most. As I was writing this, I realized that the name of Ruth's other personality was Mickey. I remember how she insisted to us at times that that was her name. She would even argue with us over the name, insisting to us children that her name was not Ruth. It was a nickname she had when she was a child. I learned from Ruth's friend growing up that Mickey was fun, smart, entertaining, sweet, kind, and thoughtful. When Mickey was out and insisting that she was not Ruth, she would spell her name for us, and she would remind us that it is spelled like Mickey Mouse. This personality wasn't around as much. Ruth had pen pals, and some of them told her Mickey. I asked her why, and she said they knew her when she was young. Of course, as an adult, I could see, looking back, the different personalities. One time, after I came home from my junior prom, Ruth came bouncing down the stairs and into my room. She was very happy and giggly. It was like she was happy to see me. She asked me why I was home so early. I asked her why she gave a damn. It struck me as strange, because she had told me over and over again that I had to be home by 12:30 a.m. and that I was not to go to any after-prom parties. When I told her this, she looked bewildered. She asked me why I thought she told me that. She insisted that she told me that I could be home at 2:30 a.m. and to make sure to have fun at the after-prom parties. I called her a liar and told her to go to hell, that I didn't want to talk to her. I was tired and was going to bed. The look of hurt on her face was terrible and genuine. She just looked at me, and her body language changed. Her shoulders slumped, and she went slowly back up the stairs. At the time, I was proud of myself for hurting her. Now it just makes me sad. That personality had no idea of the other one. It is one of the things I would take back in my life if I could. I know with what I am sharing, this probably seems strange, but the reality is that one of Ruth's personalities was nice. I just wish it was the one that was around most of the time, instead of the one that took pleasure in harming me. My childhood and my siblings' childhood would have been much better if the nice personality was out more. I'm going to end the first part of my story here. I will have another part out soon. Thanks for taking the time to listen to my story.